So hi, again, my name is Anat Caspi. I'm a faculty at the Computer Science Department at the University of Washington. I'm also a mom to a kiddo who has communication needs. And so I came by my research objectives via my child. She does not have LGS, but she has other complexities, and she does not vocalize. And so she personally uses an eye gaze communication device to express herself and is still in the stages of learning how to formulate sentences and express her ideas. That said, those were not necessarily our goals when we started along this journey. And so along the way, we explored a whole plethora of diverse goals and challenges that have to do with having your child express themselves and learn language in ways that are not typical to how kids learn language. And I think something that is really commonplace among speech-language pathologists, whom you may have run across along the way, is that a lot of times the goals are to bring a child to typical developmental stages along communication. And one of the main things I wanted to express today was that many a times it is a flawed logic to try to learn language with devices, with technologies, with toys. When the expression is different, the goals should be different. And it doesn't make sense to then convey to the child disappointment if they did not write an essay about the existential crisis in Heidegger by the time they're 16, right? The point is that the progression will be completely and totally personalized. And unfortunately, a lot of therapists don't recognize that. And then the onus is on us, the parents, to really define what that trajectory might look like and where we ought to push our children and where maybe we ought not to push them in certain directions. So I wanted to introduce Stacy, or maybe you should introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Great. My name is Stacy Sundy, and I'm a single mom of a 10-year-old girl. And she was just this last spring diagnosed with Aicardi syndrome. And with Aicardi syndrome is very much paired up with LGS. Sophia has been very medically complex her whole life, so trachs, vents, cancer. And oftentimes those things, I think, have come that back to the survival mode that he so eloquently spoke of. The survival mode was literally to keep her alive. And along the way, the professional educator and myself, I'm a school teacher, I knew that I needed to find, that Sophia, I knew she would be very young her whole life. And I knew that I had to find her special way of communicating with me. It wasn't me teaching her to communicate in our way. It was, how does she communicate? Where do I meet her so that we can have those daily meaningful exchanges? And in her own way, she can let me know what she needs and how she needs it and when she needs it. She has never spoken a formed word in her life. She smiles, she has some eyebrows, she has feelings, which are incredibly powerful for us caregivers who know that without words, how to feel what she is wanting. So the very, very strong early years of true physical survival for her. About age 5, Anat and I, as two single moms of medically complex children, made a decision that in this great world of no nursing or a nursing shortage, that it would behoove us to join our household together and bring our both of our children who have great needs together in an environment that offered more support. And in meeting Anat and understanding what she brings to the world of accessible technology for kiddos with multiple types of disabilities, I began to learn something that I needed to adjust for the rest of Sophia's life. I was under the belief that those birth through 3 years, if we didn't make a goal, if we didn't have this ability in place by that point, that we missed the boat. And I was okay with that because she had survived, right? We got to that point. And we entered a household situation where everything is rigged. Everything's got a button, everything's got a switch, everything's got a way to turn something on. And for her daughter to be able to look at the eye gaze and talk to Alexa and feed the chickens out back or whatever it is, I learned about Sophia that even at the age of 10, in a not completely nonverbal situation, that there was still learning to be had. And what I chose, that was going to be the most important thing for Sophia, was continuing to allow her to teach me through devices and through technology what she wanted to express, not what I wanted her to express, what she needed to express to me. So I'm super glad to be here today. We came to our diagnosis of LGS extremely late in the game. And in fact, Anat came home and said, I've got invited to speak at a really cool conference. It's something called LGS, and I need to do some research. And I was like, we just got that diagnosis literally within the last previous couple of months. So I'm happy as a parent to experience this community. I can see faces that I just can understand and read, and hearts that are sharing the same thing that me as an LGS mom has with my daughter, Sophia. My hope for today with Anat is that, and the two of us together, is that I can express to you as a 10-year-old, mother of a 10-year-old, that the stuff that she can potentially offer you or suggest, it's not too late, even for the most complex of our kids. It's not too late to find things and find ways that allow our kids to express the fullness of themselves. So back to Anat.
So I actually wanted to touch on something that you talked about, which was Sophia's feelings, emotions, and wants. Would you say that for the majority of her caregivers are able to decipher and understand her feelings, emotions, and wants?
Yes. Yeah, I would. I of course have the special place in my heart knowing that I'm the main driver of her boat. But she does. She figures out special ways with all of her caregivers, most of whom we've had for a while. You just have to pay attention, and you have to notice the slight difference in glances. I can literally, this is a child who's 2 to 3 months developmentally in a 10-year-old body, and I can say to her, where's Emma? Emma's a nurse that we've had for a few years. She looks to the left. Emma's to the left. I'm not going to buy that as a coincidence, right? Emma, she knows that. We don't stop affording her the opportunity to express the knowledge that she has. There's no diagnosis on her 2 pages of stuff, 2 pages of codes that will prevent her from being a human being with a soul that communicates.
And so I wanted to point out that you've actually used those subtleties of hers to kind of, I hate to use the word condition, train her to respond to you, because you've given her positive feedback when she responds to your questions appropriately, whatever that means. Right. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot is kind of harnessing those cues that are naturally there. Even if sometimes it's very funny, like a couple of times we've strapped switches to Sophia's feet where she gets a little bit of neuroatypical movement, right? And it immediately activates the toy when she's got some neuro stuff going on, and it's not quite a seizure, so we're not like trying to amplify a seizure for sure. But she's got her jiggy days, and that's a way to play. So it's a way of reinforcing and using the cues that she has. Even if some of these cues are not necessarily trying to communicate anything, but it's a way of allowing her to access play, to access toys, to access the world and environment around her, and potentially invite in other people to engage with her. I mean, one of the, we were talking about grief, one of the grief points of having a child with a disability is that a lot of times it's so hard to bring other kids in, to engage other kids, particularly when, in play or in any kind of engagement. And so a lot of the work that we've done around communication actually has to do more with the corresponder than the child themselves. And I know that that sounds almost subversive, but in a sense, if you have a toy that the child activates on will, but is inviting and brings in other kids and is brings their curiosity. They want to know more about this person. And it's less about the differences that they start noticing. It's more really about engaging around play and around the activity that's being done. Should I pull out things?
Yeah,
So
definitely. So as Anat's getting some of her stuff out of her magic bag, a case in point, Sophia has this little foot thingy that she does. It's just part of her. She taps her feet. And Anat's like, that would be great for a switch. And I automatically said, well, but what is that going to do for her? How is that going to enlighten her life in any way? So Anat said, wait till you see this. So she hooked up this toy that you can record a voice into, and she said something to the effect of, come see this. And we were in a play group situation, and Sophia's got her feet tapping, and she's got a switch at her foot, and then the voice from the teddy bear says, come see this. Come see this. Come see this. There you go. So Sophia's got her foot tapping. He's not moving. His voice is there.
But usually
One more time.
he's also dancing.
Come see this. So by doing that, Sophia, who was not able to call to her peers and say, I just want you around me. We don't have to play Monopoly, but I want your physical presence around me. She knows when there's kids in the room. She gravitates to them way more than adults. We had this bear. We had a neurofoot just kind of going. And she said, come see this, come see this, come see this. Guess what the kids in the room did? They came to her. She drew them with something that she already had in place, paired with a really simple technology. This is like a $14.99 Fred Meyer bear. It used to say Merry Christmas, but we took that off because it's kind of all-purpose year long. But she was able to draw her peers to her. And as a parent of a kiddo who has very, very intense deficits, that's what I want for her. I want her to feel that she is able to draw people in and share moments of just being together with other kids. So I'll let Anat talk about the technology, but what may seem really simple is super powerful.
When they were ushers at your sister's wedding.
Oh yeah, she was an usher at my sister's wedding, and once again we rigged up the bear, and she had her little foot going, and it said, grab a program. And so people's coming in, she could communicate. And what it did to the person who was coming in is it empowered them to feel comfortable to stop and look at this child who most would say had absolutely nothing to share with the world. And then she got to share her magic, which is the feeling, the eyes, the looks. So we used a basic piece of technology to draw the people comfortably in, so that Sophia then had an opportunity to communicate as she perfectly communicates, which is through her soul.
Yeah, so this really is a $14.99 bear that we rigged up.
And the switch.
And the switch is a switch that my daughter can use because she doesn't have very much muscle tone, but there are plenty of switches out there that could be individually, each individual can activate a very different, where to find them. So the unfortunate thing about all these kinds of things, switches and all, is that there's a market out there, and unfortunately, it's a racket. Exactly. So yes, you may be able to find these on AbleNet and other racketeers out there. These are candy corn switches. But, for someone who has enough tone to activate other kinds of buttons, those would probably be a lot cheaper and more widely available as well. Yeah, please, questions. Where? Yeah.
I mean, just for yes/no switches, like I'm doing a lot of yes/no stuff, and I went, and you can just go into Amazon and get things that just they're not
Totally.
programmable,
Yes.
Yeah.
but they're also about $10.
Right.
Yep.
And like the biggies, the big red button that they had for Staples for a long
Yes.
time. I
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can get goofy stuff like that on
Totally.
Yeah, the whole point for me in those switches, whether it's a button that you hit from Staples that says easy or whatever it is it gives Sophia a voice to say, I want to communicate with you. Just come stand next to me. Like, it doesn't have to be, like I said, a game of Monopoly. It gave her the power to call people and feel comfortable approaching this kid that could look unapproachable.
programmable ones. They're gonna. We have those.
Question? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Can it be billed through like a speech therapist ordered them?
Oh, some do. So we actually came from Pennsylvania, which is an apparently more enlightened state about these kinds of technologies, which we didn't anticipate. They actually had a vast lending library that allowed people to try the technologies before. And we're actually working on creating one here. But for the time being, I know that through certain Medicaid waivers, you would be able to order these types of technologies. It's just the same rigmarole and process that you have to go through to advise their case managers why they would need that technology. But yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Why do they make things so expensive?
Because they know we'll do
Yeah.
for our kids. They know that they're working with people who are in a
In the tight, right. Yeah, I think they completely. It's a shame. Sorry, there was another question that I saw. Maybe not. Okay. So graduating from some of the switches, I wanted to talk a little bit about avatars. So again, talking about feelings, there are definitely ways for our kids to communicate their emotions and feelings, but some may not be gestures that others recognize. And so having just very simple avatars, like this bear might be happy versus some other that might be sadness, but allowing our kids the ability to point at what emotion they might be having for caregivers and others that might not know them as well. In the technology way, we often give them an iPad app to allow them to express those emotions, and we start out really simple among two different emotions and graduate to more as they're able to express them. But even in the physical sense, and a lot of kids are very tactile, like the touch screen is meaningless to a lot of kiddos, particularly if they have vision impairments. But even if not, like a lot of times, a lot of kids do not respond to screens. And so that brings me to my next point, which is there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And unfortunately, the way our system, again, is rigged, a lot of schools nowadays will really try to streamline everyone into one iPad or one iPad app because the district bought a bulk license for 500 of them. So they'll just, dole them out to anybody who requires any kind of communication needs. And unfortunately, again, it's the onus on the parent to kind of push back and say, you know what, this doesn't fit my child's needs. We need X, Y, Z, or our goals are not even in line with this kind of technology. And unfortunately, we still see a lot of these ending up at home, many times not in a drawer somewhere and underused and underutilized while the child is actually going and has the capability of self-expression, but just not via this particular vehicle. So it's really important to find advocates that are in line with your thinking and where your child might be going. And it took a really long time for us to do that. It's not always, the specialist at Children's because they're the specialist. And that takes a lot of creative thinking and meeting a lot of people and sort of trying to understand how other parents have done this. So it's a really hard work. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think there's a lot of legitimacy to finding your own path and your child's own path. And yeah. Yeah.
Talked about the whole house is switch. In my vision, a 16-year-old who's mobile, nonverbal, but the barrier, like at school, so to speak, in an structured environment, you can communicate with device, the iPad apps. But at home, because he can get what he wants, right, and without that structure.
Sure.
I always go into the discussions and say, he needs to be the jet skills. He needs to have, an iPad or whatever the switch is at certain points within this, living area to allow him to better communicate his mom, not just go into the pantry and take out 6 bags of chips, bring them all and tear them all over the house. So how do you design that? And I know it's customizable, but a lot of the barrier is just the device or the switch, which is simple, is not at these right points to allow them to express themselves.
Right.
To be able to, I always say force it because you can't lock all the pantries because no one else can put in, right, because they forget the code, to be able to make a barrier.
Mhm.
But I always have had this vision, because I grew up with the Jetsons, and that's what I wanted the house to, even the first level also, right, was what I wanted it to look like so that he could tell me from across the room. You don't have to go, you can't make him wear the device, he doesn't like a harness to wear it out, so he's not wearing it. How do you match that?
So I think a lot of, well, it's all individualized. My daughter is not mobile. One option was to have a remote control, and she could remote everything. But it was really important for me to understand what it was that she was after. And so the reason we use Alexa is because it is a vocal interface. And so she has to then express it via her speech device, just like anybody else, right? So she needs to activate the device to say, Alexa, change the dancing lights to yellow. And I hear that, and she hears that, and Alexa hears that, and there's the feedback, right? So closing the loop on wants and needs is entirely dependent on like what it is that the learner can actually activate and how you want that to be broadcasted. Did I give you a really useful tip? Maybe not. But if your learner approaches the pantry and the pantry is locked, but there are pictures on what's inside, and he's able to actually point or touch whatever it is that he's after, that's one mechanism of telling you what he wants. And then you can bring those pictures to his room. So he doesn't even have to go as far as the pantry once he's learned that there is that association with what's there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The pictures are someplace else.
Uh-huh.
It's the wrong set of pictures because somebody put back in a provider.
True.
So the logistics of it become very challenging, not only for us as teachers,
Uh-huh.
parents, but for the child, for the learner to be able to learn because it's not easy. And so my vision of the Jetsons is saying it's an iPad that's stuck to the wall.
Uh-huh.
Those pictures that you're then sharing next to Alexa.
Yeah, no, that's totally possible. So there are even apps out there that would allow you to create an Alexa skill with, but then what would you activate for reaching for the chips? Is it just a way of the speakers would broadcast, I want chips?
Well, that's interesting. The iPad words for life is what we use.
Yeah.
It already, says, eat chips, right? You can say these words eat chips. So it's already broadcasted. It might, but have to be close enough to hear it. So
Uh-huh.
I guess Alexa would be giving us the notification that I hear.
Oh, you don't even need Alexa for
Alexa can
that.
hear everything.
No. But you can connect the iPad to speakers all over the house remotely with Bluetooth. That's just one way of making it not so local. Is he actually is part of the barrier that he won't use it in absence of the visual cue?
So the problem is the device
Uh-huh.
on the other side of the house, right?
Yeah.
It's, the kitchen table and the pantry's on the other side.
Uh-huh.
So he's not going to go to pick up the device to tell you what he wants.
He's just going
Sure.
for the chips.
Pantry,
Yeah.
right? He's gonna try to gain access. So if the device was balanced in a bigger area, food, by the pantry, then perhaps he would have to use it to communicate exactly what he wants versus me just letting him span everything.
And he refuses to wear the device, or that's just not appropriate.
We're trying to figure out, we're trialing harnesses,
Uh-huh.
like Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, yeah,
Let me see if it was on his body, would he be more
yeah.
willing to using it. And the data is a little skewed, but we're trying to see what would take nutrition other than 6 iPads in the house is a little much
Yeah.
to track of, right?
Yeah.
So with it on a magnet, it was much smoother because the things offer him a better way to communicate in a non-structured setting.
Right, right. So it sounds like, what, can I probe you a little bit about what's skewed about the data? As far as like harnessing the,
More so, it's not
I see.
consistent when you're at home to be able to capture it.
Uh-huh.
So the data is not every day, it's not, when he's actually hungry versus not hungry, it's
Uh-huh.
just providing data, so I don't think that it's really been helpful.
Okay, and does it matter to you if he invokes it when he really is hungry, or just for fun to get you to get up and get him chips?
I don't want to monopolize that. It doesn't take it off and throw it across the room.
Uh-huh.
At certain levels, it's really basic
Sure.
tolerance.
Yeah.
Then getting him to use it, so he has to, you never think your kid can do something to something they don't want.
Uh-huh.
Maybe figure out how to change it, take it off.
Yeah.
It's just getting him to move it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Closing that barrier of moving the communication.
Right.
Eye gaze, whatever it may be, so that the child can express himself. So he doesn't get Lay's potato chips when he really wants Doritos, right? I mean, because he likes them both, but if he really wanted Doritos, he should be able to ask him.
Right, but it's a lot of trials, right, where he needs to push your boundaries quite a few times and realize that you respond every time. And so then he'll know that he really will get the Doritos when he says Doritos, or the Lays if you ask for Lays, right? I think that's also important to realize. My daughter is cognitively, as far as we know, she's perfectly well, but she repeats things incessantly. And a lot of it is to test us. Are we still going to respond every time, right? And the challenge is to respond in the same way every time, to not repeat what she's repeating, because that verges on mimicry, and we want to respect that, she's communicating. And so every time it's the same conversation, and it's time and time again. But it's eventually it does end, because she's learned that we will correspond with her voice. Yeah.
So in the early developmental stages of language acquisition for all humans, it is repetition. It's the 2-year-old incessantly saying this, and it just drives us crazy. But it is true, and I've seen it work with Sophia, that if I say 500 times in a week, do you want more of this? She loves pepperoni sticks. She can't swallow, but she can suck on a pepperoni stick. And I just stay my course. I just say to myself, I'm going to spend 45 minutes with a pepperoni stick and a switch. And I smile, and I love her, and everything. But if there's no response, there's no pepperoni stick. Would you like some more pepperoni stick? Sophia, would you like more pepperoni stick? I have a drink later in the day. But it has worked. According to her diagnoses, she has regressed since the day she was born, cognitively. According to what science says, it's not true. It's not true, because now she, with her voice, when she has a Passimir valve on, I can say, do you want more of this? And I'll get a physical response. And lately I'm taking it further and saying, use your voice. And I get an utterance with her vocal cords touching. In goes the pepperoni stick. It's training. and if there's some humor behind it, and I'm just going to set this 20 minutes aside every day and just know that it might drive me crazy. I'm going to eat a pepperoni stick, and if you want one, we're going to work on it, right? And it's, I guess, I felt so passionate about coming today to say that through those 9 years of just getting her through the cancers and all of the things that kept her heart beating and her lungs pumping, she's still able to learn. she is still figuring out a way to draw attention to her physical presence in this world and not be overlooked. And I'm just all for it. Whatever it takes, keep trying things. And it needs to be repeated. It really does. And I just want to give that hope because Soph has a lot of very tough diagnoses, and she is learning. She is learning.
I went to a conference with a speech language pathologist once, and she said our kids that are intense are so, one day they have a good day, the next day is a bad day. So when she goes in to start her sessions, she looks at these kids, even if it's eye gaze, she's like, "What's your best jest for today? Tell me your best jest." And that's how they base her whole session off of is, so if they blink, then, "Oh, you're blinking, that's your best jest, so I'm going to take that as your yes." It was a really cool concept to really think about. So it depends on where your child's at that
Totally.
Absolutely.
what they can do.
Absolutely.
And so that's how she starts off every session with every child.
That's
That's
really
really
great.
empowering.
So I did want to bring to your attention that a lot of times the higher end communication devices are out of reach as far as insurance is concerned because they're $16,000 for no real good reasons. And so I did want to demo something that I've rigged together for like $700, which may still be out of reach, but is a lot closer, and is an eye gaze tracking system. So, sure, thank you. So it all starts with a surface. And, oh, sure. And there's an eye tracking device down here. I brought this because I think in speaking to Jennifer, you mentioned that your son uses an eye gaze or an eye tracking.
We try to use a lot of different tools where we're not sort of attached. We've never found the thing, right? So we use a lot of eye gaze. We also do, they use a lot of Perlico with him at school, but he's not a pointer and toucher.
Yeah.
So it's really more eye gaze that I feel is most successful.
And how does he choose? Is it through dwell time? Is it through looking and blinking?
He's very good at sort of, it's really obvious eye gaze. So it's just, he's looking at that thing and maybe reaching. Or he, and it was an interesting thing. I like what you just said there about your best yes, because, it's right now I think we've got him at the most optimum that we've ever had. He was 16. And that's why, and this isn't, sorry to sidetrack here a little bit, like, it's an interesting thing for me to listen to all of this stuff because I think we always think that we have a window of time, that speech, if you haven't developed speech or communication to a certain age, that you're never going to get it. But we know with our kids that because of, if they're at this really good place where they're having very few seizures and the medication isn't knocking them out, and they're really suddenly present, that it doesn't matter what age they're at, all of a sudden you might get something that you have never had. And I think that while it may not ever be speech, who knows, I think that that makes me very hopeful. So it's a good place for him.
Great.
So as Sophia has kind of shown some individual progress over this last year, I came to the understanding in kind of a dark, quiet moment that it doesn't matter how she communicates. What matters is that I join her as she communicates and how she communicates, right? We live with her daughter who, as she said, uses all of the top-notch stuff, and she even went as far as ordering a case of organic coconut milk off of Amazon because she could. Before she disabled it. Literally a case of organic coconut milk shows up, and Naught's like, "Why did you order that?" "I didn't. I thought you did." "No, Aviv, Alexa. She led herself through the process. She used her mom's credit card. She was 5. It wasn't there. You can accidentally get the wrong product, but she still had to go through the whole process and follow cues. And Sophia will never communicate like that. It doesn't matter. The fact is that she's heard. She's felt, she's heard. And giving her options to say, come see this, come see this, come see this, with a repetitive tick of her foot, that we thought, how can we now then tie that in to enable her to communicate or to be with? Being with is also communication, right? And this bear draws people to her. It's an interesting thing. Kids say, how did she do that? And then the natural comfort level is established. And then Sophia gets to feel the presence of other kids, and they get to learn. It's pretty great.
Well, so I just wanted to point out that a lot of the communication systems out there now are finally coming to grips with the fact that not everybody has to write a dissertation with their device. And so one such software company is Grid, and they've produced the Grid 3. And so a lot of times they create these visual scenes, just maybe scenes that the child doesn't recognize from their natural environment, but gets to learn about. So snow, if you don't live around snow, we don't really get to see snow. Exploration of like big city life or things like that. Just a scene with pictures and pictorial depictions of different parts of life that they might not get to see or experience are really kind of helpful in terms of putting names to things. And I found it actually most useful in talking about your body. I know a lot of times one of my angst as a parent is not knowing what's wrong. I know something is wrong. The child is crying. They're unhappy. Their heart rate is like up in the roof.
Having more seizures.
Yeah. But we don't know the source of the issue. Is it an ear infection? Is it a UTI? Are we, not doing the right food? What's going on? Are you just sad, right? Is it feelers? It has nothing to do with your body. Right? And so learning visually about the parts of the body and just associating them with their own physical presence. And I know this actually takes quite a bit of coordination, but through a ton of repetition, these kinds of associations can at least give us some kind of indicators as to, is it the upper or lower extremities, which can actually be super helpful in certain situations. Avoid some of the unnecessary palliative medicinals that we might deploy if there's a way for us to actually identify the source of the problem. So I didn't point, I can't right now find the right visual scene, but I can demonstrate some of the others, and you guys are welcome to come up and look at this. Like I said, this has pretty much the same function as a $16,000 Dynavox, Tobii, or PRC, but I built it for $750 with a MyGaze eye tracker and a Surface mount, and a Surface tablet, and then the Grid 3 software package. It's not cheap, but it's certainly cheaper than having to spend those ungodly thousands of dollars on it. And not everything that comes with it would be appropriate. And so again, it's that kind of customized personal search that you have to go through, which is unfortunate that a lot of SLPs out there don't go through the sort of the program of finding the right thing for your child. They come in with a preconception of what's the trajectory and how do we go about it. So a little bit of redirection, if they're willing to accept it, is really helpful. And if not, like we've moved from many SLPs to many others through the process. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, Anat founded a a center at the University of Washington called the Taskar Center for Accessible Technology, and I suspect that she'd be more than willing to make herself available to at least potentially point you in a direction if you have a question about what else might work for your child or your family member. But it is really difficult because the school system cannot train one SLP to work with your child. They hire and train SLPs to work with the general population of kiddos that have communication barriers. So the Taskar Center is out there, and there are other organizations as well that she may be able to point you to, and more specifically your area, to help you uncover. I don't know anything about this. I barely can send an email. It's okay, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. But she's thrown me some things, and then I've been able to go to Sophia's school team and say, hey, I don't really know what this is, but have you ever heard of this? I've heard it might be something that we could take a look at. So.
I think we're way past time, so I will call you guys up to join me up here if you wish. I can, and so just to recap, we talked about communication as very broadly interpreted, not necessarily about formulating sentences, but really as a way of conveying feelings, emotions, and also about communication being sometimes about the correspondent and devising ways for your child to bring in kids, adults, and others, dogs sometimes. And then we discussed anywhere on the progression from very simple switch technologies all the way up to using some of these touchscreen and eye gaze devices. But really it's about customizing the path to your child. And unfortunately, there's no rubric to that. A lot of times it's on us, the parents, to identify the network that can really support that path. Thank you so much for being so attentive. Appreciate it.